Hello, this is Kevin Cromash with CORP2020. I'm here today at Yale University with a very interesting person, Andrew Kassoy. Andrew, it's great to be here with you.
Thank you for having me.
So to begin, why don't you give us a little bit of background on what a B corporation is and how that differs from a benefit corporation?
B corporations are companies that have met a minimum set of social and environmental performance standards and that have changed their corporate articles to include consideration of stakeholder interests. B corporations are companies that are run by entrepreneurs who are trying to redefine success in business by competing to be best for the world, not just best in the world. And B Corp certification is a brand certification. One of the things that we've done at B Lab is to create something called a benefit corporation. It's a little like a B Corp in law, but we've changed corporate law in 7 states to include consideration of stakeholder interests and expand fiduciary duty for directors. And that's legislation that's being considered in 7 other states as well.
It's really great what you guys are doing. And so for those who don't know, a B corporation stands in contrast to C corporation, which is the traditional corporate legal status.
Right.
So why don't you give us a little bit background on how you got involved in this, why you saw the C corporation status as not being sufficient for some companies?
Sure. When we were starting B Lab, one of the things we recognized was that we live in a society with an increasing number of entrepreneurs who are trying to run businesses that are again, that are redefining success in business, that have mission at their core, not just money. And those entrepreneurs are constrained. There are a number of constraints in the traditional corporate environment. One of them is that there aren't any standards to tell the difference between good companies and just good marketing. And so more and more, as other stakeholders like consumers and investors care about mission of a business and care about seeing social impact from business, you have more and more companies that are just marketing themselves as green or responsible. And it's very hard to tell the difference. And so one of our objectives was to create standards that allowed other people to tell the difference between a good company and good marketing. The second big constraint that we recognized when we were starting is that the fiduciary duty of businesses is to maximize shareholder value. That's what C corporation law says. And it says that they have to do that to the exclusion of anything else. And for many of these entrepreneurs, they wanted to be able to do business in a different way. And so we wanted to address that by trying to expand fiduciary duty or remove those impediments for those kinds of businesses.
We've recognized for a long time that there are managers who might want to make changes, operate in a different way, but they're constrained by the environment in which they work on. So one of our key planks of change is we call accounting for externalities, which your example of impact ratings is a prime example.
Right.
I wonder how you see this field evolving over the coming years. What are some of the most hopeful developments in measuring environmental externalities and disclosing them?
Well, for us, let me say first that we think sort of a business is an integrated whole, and so we tend not to think just about environment or just about social impact or just about the workers, but really looking at all of those things. How's a business affecting all of its stakeholders, and how's it creating value for all of its stakeholders? That's becoming an increasingly important thing for those managers that you're talking about to consider. And they really need a standard by which to measure all of those things. And so the idea of creating a impact rating system that we developed when we started was to allow companies to measure their impact on all of their stakeholders, and then to be able to use that measurement to benchmark their performance against other companies like them or companies in their geography. And then to be able to improve their performance. So part of developing standards is not just the stick of them having to transparently show everybody how they're doing, but also the carrot of providing them with things like best practices guides and other tools to improve their performance over time.
essentially you're allowing good companies to be seen as good, and you're helping them to become better. What kind of success stories have you seen? Are there any that you particularly hold up of corporations that have recently begun as B corporations or who have rechartered as B corporations?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very long list of, there are now 520 certified B corporations, mostly in the US, but increasingly actually in markets in the developing world. One of the things I think is really exciting is that this is increasingly a global movement of entrepreneurs who want to be best for the world. And so we increasingly see actually entrepreneurs coming from other places reaching out to us and saying, I'd like to be part of this global community of entrepreneurs who are changing the world through our business.
Another of the planks of change that we think is very important is changing the operating environment for corporations to operate in.
Yep.
And one of the drivers of that is taxation and subsidies. The corporations of today are operating under laws that basically encourage them not to disclose things, encourage them to hold on to old technologies. How do you think taxation and subsidy structures might be changed to encourage better corporations?
Taxation and regulation and subsidies and things like that act as incentives for companies to behave in a certain way. So if they're set up in ways that encourage bad behavior, then companies are going to do that because that's what they're incentivized to do. We've been mostly focused with our work on providing the underlying infrastructure or the operating environment so that companies can choose to behave differently and can operate the way they want to and the way their new investors who care about these issues of impact want them to. And so we've been less focused on creating a different regulatory environment, more focused on creating the opportunities for people to behave differently, and that's what those standards are all about, and that's what the legal structure is all about. It's something for people to opt into. I do think that over time, legislators and policymakers are likely to look at that platform, like the new corporate form, and say, oh, there are ways for us to incentivize an even broader base of businesses to behave in a different way and create public value. And whether that's different taxation or procurement preferences or tax credits or things like that, those are options now that policymakers have. So for example, the city of San Francisco just in the last few weeks passed legislation that gives a procurement preference from the first city contracting to benefit corporations. The reason they did that was that they wanted to incentivize companies that are, I think the language you used would be internalizing externalities, but basically companies that are creating public benefit through their businesses. And so they've decided to give this procurement preference in a similar way to how right now they give preference in city contracting to minority and women-owned businesses.
One of the key concerns that you guys might face is companies that haven't necessarily changed their actions, advertising as if they had. This is one of the big issues we talk about.
Right.
It's so subtle because it's a very subjective question. What is ethical? What's actionable?
Right.
What kind of issues have you seen in greenwashing or advertising?
Well, this happens all the time, right? Companies, you can't open up a magazine and see an ad for any company, it doesn't matter what business they're in, that doesn't have windmills and solar panels and people holding fertile earth. And so that's a sign that obviously consumers and investors and other stakeholders care about those issues, otherwise they wouldn't be bothering to put it in their ads. But it's also a sign that we need ways to be able to tell the difference. And so part of the objective with the B Corp certification is to make good easy, is to make it simple for a consumer to say, is this a good company or a bad company, because I don't have time to do a deep dive to analyze all of the components and the ways in which a business impacts all of its stakeholders. I would like somebody, a trusted third party, to tell me whether this is a good company or not. And the objective of the standards that we've created for B corporations is exactly that. There's we have an independent standards advisory council that helps create those standards. so that you know that there are real experts who are opining and wrestling with each other to come to a good standard. And the standards change over time so that we can lift all boats. So every 2 years, there's a new version of those standards are created that takes what we know about best practices, sort of evolving best practices in the industry, and helps companies and all of their stakeholders know that these companies are all improving their performance over time.
Andrew, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.